my name is Eric Alleman. I haven't performed here in a while. It's been a bit. And I think I actually remember the last time I performed here. If I'm not mistaken, it was a story that I told in this chair. It might be this chair. It might be another chair, but I think it was this one, about my mother and our Mother's Day conversation. Chuck, do you remember it? Dave, you remember that? About the Mother's Day conversation where I had the talk with my mother. No. This was it was Mother's Day, and I was driving with my wife in a car. Now my mother, if I give you a little bit of backstory, my mother is a Scientologist, and I was raised as a Scientologist. I left the church, and it created a rift between my mother and I that remains to this day. But on this particular Mother's Day, I was feeling magnanimous. So I decided to accept her call, and we talked, and it was one of those wonderful conversations with your mother where all the pain and the frustration that had come in the years intervening from when I left the church to the time of the phone call disappeared, and we reconciled for a moment. And that was the basis of the story, was that you can reconcile, no matter what the difficulty is, no matter what the trouble is between two people, you can reconcile. And what I've realized since then is that's not true. My mother's crazy as fuck. And it's continued to be a thorn in my side since then. Now, I'm not going to get into that because my mother watched that video and reported me to the Church of Scientology for talking about certain terms you're not supposed to talk about outside of the church. So I don't want to get involved in that again. And that's not to say that I'm holding something back from you as the audience. If there was something that I felt was compelling, I would tell you. But it's just the mother-son, nitpicking. Nobody wants to hear about that. Exactly. Nobody wants to hear about that. So what I figured was I would talk about something more recent. I would talk about something more immediate. And the most immediate thing for me was over the course of the last probably week or two, I felt like I was going to die. I felt like I was dying. I felt like my body was breaking down. And it might be because of drinking or smoking or living excessively or any of the number of diseases that I have. Not sexually transmitted diseases. I'm happily married with 2 children. I'm not dying from herpes. But I felt like I had this pain in my back. And when you have a pain in your back that doesn't feel like a pulled muscle, it feels like a pain on the inside, So that as you're sitting on the couch, you feel a pain that feels like it's in your lung or in your, like it's a pain that's inside that no matter how much somebody rubs, it doesn't go away. And you start moving differently and you start thinking to yourself, Jesus, what if my kidneys fail? Or what if my liver fail? What if something, is this the kind of situation where a wife wakes up next to a husband and the husband's just dead? Like fish scale white and clammy. And I don't want to, I always figured that I would go on my terms. One of 2 ways. First would be suicide, which is obvious. That's the one way you can control your death. Or the second would be an accident, like an accidental overdose or crashing a car while you're drunk, something like that. And you feel like you can control your death under those circumstances. But if you're dying outside of your control, if you feel like your body is just breaking down and you have no control over when that death comes, I was disturbed by that. I was disturbed by the idea that I had no control over the time when my death would come. And then suddenly, today, it was 60 degrees, and I didn't feel bad at all. My back suddenly stopped hurting, and I felt great. So I think it had something to do with just living in Cleveland and being depressed. But regardless, that brought me to this evening and this evening's performance, because I was feeling awful and I was feeling sick, and I had pains in my body, so I wasn't thinking about tonight's performance. So today I started feeling better. Like I honestly thought that there was a possibility that I wouldn't make it to tonight's performance. I'd be too sick, or my back would hurt too much, or I'd feel too awful, so I wouldn't be able to do it. And then suddenly today I felt great. So I thought, all right, so what, like as I was driving here, it was interesting. As I was driving here, I live across 117th in Lakewood. And as I was driving down Madison, usually when I drive down Madison, like I tend to listen to weird music. You know, like I'll listen to it depends, but I'll listen. Like today, I found this thing on the internet called Dank Sinatra, and it's dubstep mixed with like dirty urban hip hop. You know, like I don't even know some of the names of these people. It's so underground. You know, but it was wonderful. So I've been listening to it a lot over the last couple of days. And as I was driving in, I was like, oh, usually when you're driving through this neighborhood, you know, you're like, you roll the windows up, you know, you don't want to cause any trouble. You know, if you stop at a stoplight and, you know, you don't want to be a 36-year-old white guy driving a station wagon, listening to hip hop music mixed with dubstep. You know what I mean? And there's like, because it's nice out. So there's 16-year-old kids walking down the street and you're like, I don't even want the possibility of confrontation. And today I was like, fuck it. I rolled all the windows down. And I was like, every day I'm hustling. It was beautiful. Because I thought, you know what? I thought I was going to die last week. So what are you going to do? You know, like what's the worst you can do? You can do what I thought was going to happen last week. So I wasn't worried. And as I'm driving here, I'm thinking like, okay, what do I do? What do I do for the people that are coming to see the performance? Like, what do I do? Like, what would be a thing if I were going to come to a performance knowing that not that I was going to die soon, because that's a little too cliched, you know, like I'm going to die soon. Like, what would I say? Because then I would say to you, like, I don't know what I would do. But what I decided I would do tonight is I would go back over some things that I wrote in the past very quickly. I would go over the things that I wrote in the past very quickly that I wrote in as poetry. Because poetry, I think now at 36, the point that I'm at right now, is a way to take a pure idea or a pure story or something you want to communicate to someone and coding it, making it obtuse, making it different. You know what I mean? Like if you're trying to communicate something to someone, one person to another, you wouldn't choose poetry as the way that you would communicate it, would you? No, of course not. Because poetry is subjective. You know what I mean? Like you can see poetry as being one way or the other. You know, like if you want to say something to somebody, you say it directly, clearly, concise. You know? You don't say it in poetic fashion. So what I realized was there were things that I tried to communicate with people in the past, and I didn't, because I coded it. Because I not coded, C-O-A-T-E-D, C-O-D-E-D, coded, you know? So what I would like to do is, I would like to read maybe one or two pieces that I wrote in the past that were coded and tell you exactly what I meant. Is that all right?
Of course.
All right. Let's give it a shot. So this is a book of poetry that I put out a couple of years ago. Years ago now. Jeez. Let's just go with the first one. A place where we all stand and imagine we can see each other from. And there are songs in childhood, songs of dust and ashes, trolls and under bridges, and water that mingled with the clouds. See, that's awful. Like, why would you write that? Like, why is that necessary? Morning spent in front of a television and a pine tree that could never be climbed. See, you're like saying, look, when I was a kid, I spent most of my time, because my mother was divorced from my father and I lived in a single parent home, I spent most of my time at my great-grandmother's house. And she had a huge pine tree in the front yard. It was huge. I mean, it towered above the house, but we could never climb it. Why? Because it was in front of my great-grandmother's house. Your great-grandmother isn't going to let you climb a tree. If it's 5 feet high, your great-grandmother's not going to let you climb a tree. You know? But, oh God, we wanted to climb this tree so bad because it was so fucking high. But I remember how wonderful it was to go to her house and watch Saturday morning cartoons because my mother was this, she believed in health food and no television. And, oh God, now I have children of my own. I don't feed them all health food and no television. That creates me. You know, that creates a person that eats garbage and drinks constantly and does drugs and watches television incessantly. You don't do that. You don't force someone not to do the little things that are nice in life. The world is awful. The world is a brutal, awful place. Candy is good. You know, television is good. Not all television, but there's some good television. Breaking Bad's a good show, you know? Like Space Ghost when I was a kid, that was a good show. You know? Let your kid watch Space Ghost. Let your kid eat a little bit of fucking candy. So anyway, back to the stupid fucking poem. My grandfather's rain barrel, it stood so rusty and bloated. Now, next to their garage was this big 50-gallon drum, and the runoff from the garage gutter ran directly into this rain barrel, and it would overflow when it was raining. You know, you'd look out the backyard and it would overflow as it was raining, but when you'd go out there, it was just full of water. But as you look closer, there were, I don't know if they were fish or they were insects, but there were things living in this big drum of water. And we were so fascinated by it. You know, we'd walk out and we'd look in this barrel and we'd see all these, like, it was like a school of fish. They just swim around and around and around. And God, we wanted to grab them, you know? We wanted to but of course, it's your great-grandmother's house. So you can't put your arm in the rain barrel. And why? Because it stood rusty and bloated. Any tiny little bugs that swam in packs of like schools of fish. They made faint ripples. Now, and we would wonder, which when it was so dark, keeping an eye on the back door of the house, waiting for the sharp intake of breath that would come right before my great-grandmother screaming, "Get the Sam hell away from that thing. It belongs to your grandfather. You'll get sick, and then where will you be?" All right, that's a true line. As far as poetry is concerned, that's a true line. You know, that's one of the few true lines I've ever written in fucking poetry. I'll allow that one. I won't add anything to that. That was a true fucking line. And through many long summers, these songs we sing and stories we tell turn slowly into sonnets of love and desperation. But there's enough time for all that. And I guess, you know what? That's all right too. Because essentially what that means is when you're a kid, you're fascinated by rain barrels and television and candy. And then there comes a time when that doesn't mean anything. When suddenly you don't need to not watch TV because it's a social issue, but because you're too busy trying to figure out who you are, trying to figure out why you're doing what you're doing, who you're going to be, who you love, who you hate. So I guess that's all right too. I'll allow like the last quarter of that poem. All right, second poem. It was out of sight when you were born. Under a blue flash in copper skin, Mom preached patience and tolerance, and she was the only one. We teetered, you and I was up and you were down, and then we'd switch. I still can't believe you're gone, because God still keeps painting your face in the clouds. Now you hear that poem, it doesn't make sense. Like, what does that mean? You know, it can mean anything. What it means is, my friend Jason Blank, uh, we tended to have this weird kind of roller coaster of life experience. When I met him, I was going up on the self-destructive ride, and he was coming down on the self-destructive ride. And then maybe a few years later, I was going down the self-destructive ride, and he was coming up the self-destructive ride. And every once in a while, we would meet in the middle, you know. And we were horrible, like we you become horribly addicted to drugs. It becomes this painful thing. And then eventually, like all relationships, when things become untenable, when the relationship becomes so damaging, you have to. It's almost like an explosion. You know, it's like I don't know what I'm not a scientist, and I'm not trying to be one, but what's the idea of I guess like a black hole or something, when everything starts sucking in to a spot, and then when it sucks in so close that it has to then expand again, you know, like how they say the universe, like the Big Bang was when everything came together and then, you know, had to explode and go back out. And that's the way it was. Like we had a relationship where we kept going out and back and out and back and further and further and further, and eventually we went so far out, and then we came back, and it was so painful, it was so visceral, it was so tight that we couldn't go in anymore. We couldn't destroy ourselves anymore. So when it exploded, it blew him to Colorado, and it blew me to Cleveland. And it was like he died, you know? It was like he disappeared because we knew that we couldn't communicate. Like fundamentally, something deep inside, we knew that we couldn't communicate anymore because we knew if we did, it would just continue that self-destruction. We knew we had to keep getting further and further apart. And it tore me to fucking shreds because this was my best friend. This was the person I was closest to. This was the person that I felt understood me better than anybody else that I've ever met. When my wife and I got married, Jason said to her, I just want you to know that if I was a woman, Eric wouldn't be marrying you. He'd be marrying me. Yeah, he was my best friend. And that's the fucking poem that I wrote about that. And it doesn't even explain it. It doesn't say anything, you know? It doesn't say anything. It doesn't explain how one of the people that I felt closest to in the world, I had to push him away. I had to for my own survival. And he still lives in Colorado, and I still live in Cleveland, and we're all right, you know? He's doing fine in Colorado, I'm doing fine in Cleveland. I don't know how it would be but you know what? I think I'll try, you know? I mean, you have to try, because what's worse? Living without your best friend for your entire life or giving it another shot, you know? Should I do one more?
Yes. Sure.
Yeah? All right, one more. One more. All right. Oh, this is going to get political. So, if there are any Republicans in the audience, you should probably leave now. If you must know, I learned this at work. I ask you, do you plan on bending all of America back into earth? Have you ever seen, in real life or on TV, a missile, after it's shot into the air, lose its way, somehow getting disconnected from what is guiding it? And it spirals and swirls like a mad snake in the sky, and then smashes with a great thud and fantastic crash into the ground. America is that missile.
And as I stand under this madness in the sky, I am terrified and mesmerized by the raw power and devastating energy of it all. I had no idea we were all capable of so much. So now that I know, I see that not stopping violence is violence. All right, I'll allow that one. I wrote that while America was invading Iraq. And I was watching on television. I remember, because I had watched Apocalypse Now, and I had watched Hearts of Darkness, the filmmaker's Apocalypse, you know, the making of Apocalypse Now, and I had watched all the Vietnam documentaries, and I had watched all these different things. Like I'd watched, you know, like Vietnam was the most covered war in my life, you know, so you could watch all of it. You could watch so many aspects of it. And then suddenly here I was. You could watch the murder of it. You could watch the violence of it. You could watch the chaos of it. You could watch the wrongness of it. And then suddenly here I was at 6 o'clock in the morning, sitting in my living room in boxer shorts and a t-shirt with my wife sleeping in the bedroom, and I'm watching one country bomb another country, like bomb it so viciously. And all I kept thinking was, this looks like a video game. This doesn't look like Vietnam. You know what I mean? This doesn't look like people are doing this to other people. This looks fascinating. This looks exciting, you know? Like you watch these explosions and you didn't see any people. There were never any people. You never saw a single person get hurt. You just saw these lines, these vistas, these cityscapes of these buildings, and you would just see this mushroom cloud explode up, and you see another mushroom cloud explode up. And I remember thinking to myself, I feel awful that this is okay. Like I felt like it was all right. I felt like this isn't really happening. You know? Like you're watching something that isn't really happening. And I don't think that's all right. I don't think that's okay. I don't think it's all right to be able to package something so brutal and so vicious and so violent in such a clean, marketable, exciting package. I don't think that's all right. Well, I feel like I explained those 3 poems. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Eric Alleman. Thank you very much.